What's going on, YouTube? My name is Dave Sarna, and welcome to a Week 11 edition of the Rise and Fall Fantasy Football Show. On today's episode, guys, we are going to be going over the top waiver wire picks for you guys to pick up here in Week 11, being that it is Waiver Wire Wednesday Eve. Now, we are going to be going over primarily the top running backs and the top wide receivers. We'll sprinkle in at the end, though, a couple quarterbacks and maybe even a tight end or two if we see one on the market that deserves to be talked about. But that being said, guys, if you do want any more information or you need any particular line of questions that you need answered, just drop a comment in the section below. Hit us up on Twitter at Rise and Fall Pod, and we'll get back to you with an answer for you for your matchups this weekend. With all that being said, guys, let's get into this week's episode for Week 11, top waiver wire pickups. All right, guys, so we're going to start off with the running backs here in Week 11 here for the waiver wire targets that you guys should be going after. And number one on our list is Nyheim Hines. Now, I get it, Nyheim Hines in a three-headed backfield with Jonathan Taylor and Jordan Wilkins. It's not the most, exciting situation, but in my opinion, Nyheim Hines is the best looking running back out of the three of the bunch. And the reality is, guys, he's still only 41% owned on Yahoo. Look what he did last week. 12 rushes for 70 yards and a touchdown, 5 receptions for 45 yards and a touch. Now, if you're looking for a guy to, let's say, start for you for the next couple of weeks, guys that were injured, that you have a guy taking over, then of course Nyheim Hines isn't exactly going to be the best option. He could bring some good standalone value any given week. The problem is we just don't know when that's going to happen. So my recommendation for those who want to go out and get Nyheim Hines, if you are in those leagues where he is unowned and on the waiver wire, then I suggest for the teams that either A, have a guy like Jonathan Taylor, who is their RB2. If they're struggling, don't have other depth, he's a guy I would absolutely make sure you have as a handcuff. And let's be real here, if you need some more depth for later in the year, I think Nyheim Hines is the perfect kind of waiver wire pickup, guys. That will be a good playoff potential pickup for guys. If you get hurt and you need to throw in a desperate flyer, he might be a much better value than some of the other guys on your bench or out there on the waiver wire at that point in time for the playoffs. That is why I do have him at number one. In my opinion, he is the best back in Indy. He looks the best, the most explosive, the most dynamic, and he has a big play potential that allows him to get you some solid points if you start him, but he also has a pretty low floor because of the committee going on in the Indianapolis Colts backfield. Number two is a guy who I like a lot more for immediate value, guys, and that is Kalen Ballage. Listen, I wouldn't be saying this a couple of weeks ago. I can't believe I even have him on these rankings. The fact of the matter is Kalen Ballage has been a journeyman in his really short career here in the NFL, and yet he was producing finally with a really good offense in the Los Angeles Chargers. He's only 19% owned even after last week's pickups and people that played him in Week 10. So Week 11, he should be one of the top waiver wire pickups here at running back. He is going to be the guy until Justin Jackson is back. And Justin Jackson just went on IR last week. So that is a minimum of 2 weeks that you're going to have Kalen Ballage most likely as the top back there in Los Angeles in a pretty high-powered offense. Just be mindful. There is rumors that, hey, DeAndre Washington was signed to this team, or traded to this team rather, from the Kansas City Chiefs. So that's something to look out for. He is eligible, I believe, to be activated now, Week 11 coming in. Also, Matt Breida, who is questionable for last week's games and ended up not playing, may come back this week as well. So it could curb my excitement for this value. It is a risky play, but for right now, I think he earned himself a role here to at least be the primary guy and get first down and second down touches. Last week, guys, he had 18 rushes for 68 yards. He had 5 receptions for 34 yards. He had double-digit fantasy points in half-point PPR and full-point PPR. So especially in those formats, you should feel okay starting him. I think he's going to be okay. He'll be the primary guy over Troy Pope and Joshua Kelly. Kalen Ballage comes in at number 2. Now, moving right along here, guys, at number 3, we have Salvon Ahmed, the man who replaced Kalen Ballage in that Miami backfield. They actually cut Kalen Ballage and then signed Salvon Ahmed, and Salvon Ahmed was able to come in and get some things done for you last week, guys. He's only 6% owned in Yahoo leagues right now, and he had 21 carries last week, 86 yards, and a touchdown. Now, I have to give a quick shout out to my guy, Dolphins Dude. If you guys don't know him, follow him on Twitter. He's a diehard Dolphins fan, and he really knows his stuff when it comes to this team. And asked me, said, hey, Dave, I think I'm going to start Salvon Ahmed over, I believe it was like Henry Ruggs or someone of that nature, someone not that great. And, I said, hey, listen, I don't know what you should really do. I don't know much about this guy, but if you feel like he is going to do something, go for it. Start him. Well, he did, and he got 15 points, and I think he got the victory in that game. That being said, guys, Salvon Ahmed is an interesting option here. I have him at number 3, just below Kalen Ballage for a very specific reason. Even though Jordan Howard was waived, even though he was playing 44 or 58 snaps, even though he had 84% of the team's backfield touch percentages, there is a potential that, like we said, DeAndre Washington, Matt Breida, will they be activated? Will they dig into the production for Salvon, or will he get the premier role? I am not sure about that at this current moment, so news like this can always break like the day after waiver wire. So I'm just being cautious here. I think Kalen Ballage has the more concrete situation. It doesn't seem like there's as much doubt with, oh, he could be the guy in the next 2 weeks or so. Where Salvon Ahmed, listen, he had a great game last week, but they just traded for DeAndre Washington. What makes me think that him and Matt Breida back, all of a sudden those two guys who are veterans don't steal some touches? So that does concern me a little bit. But that being said, if you need the depth, you need the guy with someone on bye or so forth, Salvon Ahmed will give you the immediate value for the next 2 weeks or so, at least until Myles Gaskin returns. And he should be able to get you some pretty good fantasy points based on what he did in week 10. That brings us to our number 4 pick, guys, Devontae Booker. And I've seen some people have him a little higher in their rankings. I've seen some kind of chatter about him like, oh man, do we need to pick him up? Well, let's take a look. 3% owned on yahoo.com right now, so he's not owned at all. 17 touches last week, 83 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, any other week, I'd be like, man, Devontae Booker is a great pickup for you guys. Look what he's doing, even with Josh Jacobs in the backfield. But let's pump on the brakes real quick. Guys, I need to break this down for you so you can get a real idea of what Devontae Booker did here in week 10, because I am telling you that Devontae Booker is actually a smokescreen. I don't think he's worth the pickup, or at least a lot of money if you're using your fab budget, or if you have a high waiver over some of these other guys we mentioned. I don't like him, and here is why. Devontae Booker, guys, 10 carries for 35 yards and a touchdown before garbage time. And you can arguably put that first touchdown in garbage time, as the Raiders were already up 24-6 at that point. And it seemed like once that touchdown was scored, it was going to literally be garbage time, which is what it became when they just ran out the clock with 6 minutes left with Devontae Booker. Well, when they were doing that, that's when he added another 7 rushes for 46 yards and a touchdown. So he did have 17 touches, he did have 83 yards, and he did have 2 touchdown guys. But I would argue that a lot of that production came in garbage time when Josh Jacobs already had 21 plus touches and 112 yards and 2 touchdowns himself. That's when Devontae Booker finally got in and got some things done. So I am going to be very, very, very cautious about telling you guys to go out and get Devontae Booker. I just don't think he's worth the pickup unless you have like a Josh Jacobs where he could be a great handcuff, or you're so desperate and the position is so depleted on the waiver wire that you need some addition. Then I guess, yeah, number 4, he has had double-digit fantasy points the last 2 weeks. Maybe they will start to give him a little bit more to take some pressure or some volume off of Josh Jacobs to keep him healthy, but I just don't see that being the trend as of right now, so I cannot recommend him any higher than number 4, under the 3 that we mentioned before him. For number 5, guys, I did it a little differently because there was 2 guys here who have been on and off the waiver wire, it seems like, all year long here. And they're not the sexiest names in the world or the sexiest players here, but we got 2 guys here who are both 24 and 25% owned, who do get volume and production on not weekly basis, but every other week or so. They are getting some good points on the board, and they could be a really good handcuff if you guys need them for Darrell Henderson, or if you have Damian Harris or so forth. I wouldn't recommend that. But Malcolm Brown and Rex Burkhead, guys, listen, I put them together here because, in my opinion, they're kind of the same type of player. They both are in these committee situations that are muddled with tons and tons of running backs and guys who can produce. They are both not the number 1, but they're both not the number 1 guy in their backfield, and yet they always seem to produce and get some production. And then they both have these games where they can get these boom games for you. So that gives them a little value to me. Now, these are your deep of the deep guys. These are like the desperate bye week fillers. My friend in my fantasy league, one of the opponents that I needed him to win to knock off the number 1 seed from his win streak, and he did. had to start Malcolm Brown desperately this week because of that. He was on the waiver wire. He picked them up, and guess what? Malcolm Brown had the 2 touchdowns and 20-plus fantasy points and a half-point PPR. Same thing with Rex Burkhead. There are people that have been utilizing that and putting him in and getting that like boom game out of him. But just be cautious here. These are very volatile players just because of the committees, and also we just don't know how the coaches are going to utilize the game scripts or game flow, so it could change at any given moment. The guy can have 20 points this week and have 4 the next, so that's why I have him at number 5. Although if you need a little bit more consistency, some long-term depth, like Nyheim Hines was at number 1 for maybe the playoff push or the end of playoff push to get into the playoffs, these are some guys to keep an eye on. They tend to not get picked up in fantasy leagues, and if they do, they also tend to get dropped. So keep an eye out for them if you are desperate and the other 4 that we talked about get taken and you don't know what to do tomorrow morning when you're looking for a new running back that you didn't get in your waiver wire claim. Well, if Malcolm Brown and Rex Burkhead are there, I would go for one of those guys. By the way, guys, I would choose Malcolm Brown over Rex Burkhead. So I have him above him on this because it's kind of like 5A and 5B. Just so you guys are aware. Now, with all that being said, guys, that is the running backs I would target in Week 11 on the waiver wire. Now let's jump into the wide receivers. The wide receiver group is very interesting this week, in my opinion, and that's who I would personally be targeting. Now, granted, obviously, running backs are the premium position, so if you need depth there, you need someone there, you go after them. But I do like the value that you're going to get at wide receiver this week as well, particularly our number 1 guy of the week. Let's talk about him, guys. Michael Pittman, a wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, guys. He's only 10% owned in fantasy leagues, and he had 8 targets last week for 7 receptions and 101 yards. This is really cool to see because we have been waiting desperately for an Indianapolis Colts receiver to step up for us this year. And let's be real here. There's been no rosterable, at this point, receiver since week 2 with Paris Campbell earlier in the season that really you could throw in your lineups or even be warranted to be stashed on your bench, right? These guys have been just lackluster in Indianapolis. Phillip Rivers has not found that rapport with really any of his pass catchers, even the tight ends, who I thought were going to be a more premium position there with Phillip Rivers in town. But Michael Pittman comes in, guys. 2 weeks ago, he's been hurt. He finally comes back 2 weeks prior. 7+ targets last week, and then 8 targets this week for 7 for 101, and he seems like he's become the new target for Phillip Rivers. I think he's the number 1 wide receiver you need to go out and pick up. He could be a guy that could be extremely valuable for you in the long term, because if Phillip Rivers has found any wide receiver that he has rapport with, he's going to be the featured guy most likely. So he pretty much becomes their number 1 receiver right off the bat, just based off of necessity that all the other receivers have been absolute garbage for the Indianapolis Colts so far this year. So he rounds out my wide receivers at number 1. Now, number 2, guys, I get it. Keelan Cole, man, I know. You guys are going to sit here and look at me and like, Dave, what the hell are you talking about, man? Keelan Cole? Really? Listen, Keelan Cole is 27% owned, and reality is he had 5 for 7 for 47 yards and a touch. Nothing too impressive. He did have the 1 return touchdown, which was cool to see. But guys, Keelan Cole is getting double-digit fantasy points when he makes 5+ catches. I just want to reiterate that. Double-digit fantasy points when he has 5 catches in a game. All you have to do is get him the ball a minimum of 5 times, and it's most likely he might actually put up double-digit points for you. Now, the problem with that is he hasn't exactly gotten 5+ catches per game. So I'm hoping that this trend is going to continue to go up. He actually has been, if you look at his numbers, a really consistent wide receiver. And my biggest worry with him was, will he have a rapport with Jake Luton like he does with Gardner Minshew? And week 1, it was a no. It didn't look like that way last week with Jake Luton, but this week, obviously, it looked a little better. He caught 5 of his receptions out of 7 targets given, 47 yards and a touch, like we said, and the return touchdown. So, in my opinion, guys, I love Keelan Cole. He's actually a really good immediate pickup, a guy who, no matter who the quarterback is, Gardner Minshew or Jake Luton, you can feel actually kind of comfortable throwing him in a lineup in a desperate play if you need to, or have him on your bench as depth. I think he's warranted that respect. And the reality is that he also brings you season-long value. If DJ Chark goes down, if one of your receivers goes down, you'll have a guy who actually might be in a lot of shootouts down the road with the way this team is. They have a good run game, so they can open up the pass a little bit here, and they just need to keep getting it done. But they have two quarterbacks that can get this guy the ball, so I do like Keelan Cole here as my number 2 option. As stated, guys, only 27% owned, which actually is kind of interesting and really strange, actually, if you look at his actual numbers. But I love Keelan Cole here, guys, at my number 2 spot. He's been, one word for him this year has been consistent to a degree. There's certain games, obviously, he doesn't, but for the most part, he's been pretty consistent and pretty dynamic in a team that needs a number 2 receiver. And number 3, guys, we have Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And I know, some people are going to look at me like, really, Dave, you have MVS under Keelan Cole? Well, guys, listen, we've seen this from Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He's 17% owned now for a reason, even after a big week last week, right? And he did have the 6 targets this week. He had the 4 catches for 149 yards and a touchdown. I'm going to sit here and tell you, we've seen this before with MVS. Actually, like multiple times, where he has these really good games, not crazy high receptions, right? But a lot of yards for the reception. So he had a big boom play or whatever it may be, and a touchdown or 2 touchdowns. And then they'll have a game or maybe 2 like that. But then what happens, guys? We all know the answer, right? I don't even know if I need to say it, but I'm going to. He flutters out. He busts half of those games for the rest of the season. And most likely, you're not going to start him when he puts up the boom game. All right. So I do like Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He does look explosive the last 2 weeks, but listen, Allen Lazard is back. Robert Tonyan's going to be a little bit healthier, and I don't know if that's going to affect anything, but Allen Lazard being back, he's kind of their number 2 in my opinion. That should be the guy that you should be really going after and putting in your lineups if you're going to choose one of the 2 this week. I just don't trust Marquez Valdes-Scantling. It's really more of a history thing with us, right? Marquez Valdes-Scantling has done this before. Literally the same thing. Put up these gaudy numbers with low receptions, touchdowns, this and that. And then what did he do? He did nothing for you for practically 70% of the year moving forward. The thing I like is this is happening a little later in the season, so there's a lot less weeks for error when it comes to taking him. But to be honest with you, I would rather go with a Keelan Cole, who I know no matter what the situation is, has a chance to have a good game. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is much more hit or miss or boom or bust than Keelan Cole is, in my opinion. With that being said, guys, I do like him. If you need a receiver to pick up on the waiver wire, he's not a terrible option. Like we said, he did have 2 weeks of production here, but just be mindful that, listen, Allen Lazard can come back and he can put up like 3 points for you this week. So just be careful with that. If you want to put him on your bench to stash him, if you have Devontae Adams or Aaron Rodgers and you want some depth in case one of those guys goes down for the playoffs, that also works. I actually love the pickup for that situation, no doubt about it. Number 4, it's a little smaller of a name and a little smaller of a player, but I think he's going to play big for you in the rest of the year. Maybe not every single week, but I think he's going to get production, and that is Jakeem Grant, guys. Listen, Preston Williams is out for the next couple of weeks on IR. We don't know when he's going to be back, but I also think that Jakeem Grant is a much different receiver, obviously, than Preston Williams. If you literally put them next to each other, you would see the height difference in how they are. Jakeem Grant, to me, is the slot guy on this team, and I like him a lot because mainly Tua Tagovailoa or young quarterbacks in general tend to have to lean on some of those guys when some of the outside stuff is either not working for them, whether they're not used to throwing those balls on the pro level yet, or the coverage is just really good that your receiver can't get open, like we saw this week with Devontae Parker. But Jakeem Grant, guys, he's going to be a guy who can get you some potential volume. I really like him mainly in a PPR league, full point PPR, but 5% owned. He's the number 2 receiver on this offense right now, and he was the best performing receiver on this offense. We saw it. 2 catches for 32 yards for Devontae Parker. He was shut down. Well, Jakeem Grant had the 5 targets, 4 catches, 43 and a touch. Very efficient, very effective. I love that he got 4 out of the 5 that was given to him. That just tells me that he needs to get more targets, and Tua might look his way if that's going to be the trend in the production there. He might be the guy instead of Mike Gesicki, who's going to be kind of the middle of the field type of option for Tua Tagovailoa, and that could be pretty good things for Jakeem Grant down the road, especially if Tua really gets into form finally and gets hot very late. So I do like Jakeem Grant as a deeper flyer here in the waiver wire pickup, but he comes in at number 4. Absolutely. I really like the value there. On an offense that, even with Preston Williams back, by the way, guys, I still kind of like him. I think this is his time to carve out a legit role in this offense this year. And even when Preston Williams comes back, I predict at least within the next 2 weeks, he will actually be at the point where he is part of the offense regardless when Preston Williams comes back. So I do like Jakeem Grant. I think he gives you some immediate value, obviously, the next 2 weeks or so, since, but I also think he gives you some season-long value as well. For the playoff hunt, I do like Jakeem Grant. And then at number 5, guys, now I always tell you, and I always say this, I don't like to put anyone in here that's over 40%. But that being said, guys, Sterling Shepard comes in at number 5, mainly because I'm stunned to see that he is only 50% owned. Now, again, I don't put 50% owned players in the waiver wire. In my opinion, that's not a bold prediction, if you will, right? It's really just kind of, oh my God, I can't believe he's 50%, and why is he not on rosters in some of these leagues? So this is more for those leagues that don't have it. Maybe they're 10-team leagues, and that's skewing everything. But listen, you're in a league, 12-team, 14-team, 16-team, with IR spots and a bunch of ways and a bunch of bench spots that kind of depletes the waiver wire. Sterling Shepard's still there. You should go and pick him up, guys. He had 6 targets last week, 6 receptions for 47 yards here. And this is my favorite stat, I think, of the entire episode. He has had 6+ catches, guys, 4 weeks in a row since his return to the Giants roster. He was hurt for all of that before, but not 6+ targets, by the way, 6+ catches. So he hasn't been getting crazy yards with those catches, or the touchdowns for that matter. But I have to think that eventually he'll hit pay dirt, and that could happen very well this week. So I do love Sterling Shepard here. I don't usually put anyone over 40%. Nyheim Hines is 41, so he's on the border there. But I don't usually put anyone over 40% in the waiver wire video here. But Sterling Shepard gets special consideration because I think he is a more consistent talent that needs to be rostered, especially in a full-point PPR. If he's getting you 6+ catches every game this year, then you're at least getting 6 points with him regardless. So I would go with that, absolutely. So, if that's being said, guys, if a player is getting 6+ catches, the reality is that he, in a full point PPR, that's 6 points right off the bat without the yardage. So, if you're going to be able to get that right to start almost every week, then I would absolutely be rostering Sterling Shepard, especially in your PPR leagues. Full point, even half point can work as well. Now, with that being said, because we had Sterling Shepard, because he was kind of over our threshold here, we wanted to add some guys that you should be keeping an eye on for the next couple of weeks. Maybe these are guys you're not going to go out and pick up this week unless it's a super deep league or you're in a dynasty league or anything along those lines here. But I do like these guys for maybe some longer term value down the line. Not guys I'm going to go out particularly and pick up off the waiver wire this week, but guys that maybe in a week or two might be someone that we will have on this episode that's saying you need to have it as a must start. So we want to make sure we get ahead of the curve here and make sure maybe we have an eye on some of these guys in case they do finally explode. Now, as you can see on the screen here, guys, we have Josh Reynolds, okay, the 3rd wide receiver for the Los Angeles Rams. Top right in the Baltimore jersey, we have Willie Snead. I know, but he's 1% owned. He actually has had double-digit fantasy points 2 of the last 3 weeks here. So he's been doing pretty well. Obviously, weeks 2 through 7 for him were awful. But he's been pretty productive the last 2 weeks. Or last 3 weeks, rather. And he could be someone that, on a team that needs a number 2 receiver could step up. The 2 other guys are really more for deep stashes dynasty, if you will. Cam Sims from the Washington football team. The 6'4" Alabama receiver is super fast, guys. He's 0% owned right now. And reality is with Cam Sims, he really has a nice rapport with Alex Smith. He's quickly becoming their number 2 there. And if Alex Smith is going to throw the ball 55 times a game, which won't happen every week, by the way, then Cam Sims could be a potential option. What I like is that even if he doesn't throw the ball that much, 2 weeks ago, Cam Sims, 3 catches on 3 targets for 100 and whatever yards. So, first 100-yard game, I think anyone would say we're desperately waiting for a number 2 to emerge in Washington, opposite of Terry McLaurin, to help open things up a little bit. But my mentality with Cam Sims is if he does step up, Terry McLaurin's clearly the number 1 receiver. Teams are going to respect that and focus on that, and that will allow opportunities for Cam Sims. Similar situation for the guy in the bottom right corner there, and that is KJ Hamler. Now, I was going to put Tim Patrick on here, but I think KJ Hamler is the more dynamic and interesting prospect to go after, especially for later weeks. Now, the cool thing is, I say that, but KJ Hamler has been fantastic this year, and the reality is he might be the most dynamic player underneath that they have. Now, let me just give you a couple little tidbits here. He's had 10 plus targets. He's averaging 8 points over the last 3 weeks in fantasy games. Go look at his target share. He is getting a stupid amount of targets right now, and those targets will eventually lead to more fantasy points, and he's putting up quite commendable points as is. Now, obviously, Drew Lock in that offense could be a big worry, obviously, any given week, but I do like KJ Hamler, especially as a deep stash on your roster. If you have Jerry Jeudy and you want to have a handcuff for him, I don't recommend that, but I do like KJ Hamler to look out for in the future. Again, guys, I'm not saying go out and get these guys in week 11, but maybe week 12, week 13, they will become more relevant, and maybe for a playoff push, some of these guys may help your lineups. So now that we've gotten the running backs and wide receivers out of the way here, there was no tight ends that I truly saw this week, guys, that I thought might be a good value for you. Reality is, I think maybe Logan Thomas and Jordan Reed would be the two that I would look at, but it's such a weak position that I don't think it's going to benefit you. If you have a guy on your roster that has, a tougher matchup, but is more of a starting tight end than maybe Jordan Reed and Logan Thomas, I would probably go with those guys over. I would go with your guy over their guy. Does that make sense? So with all that being said, guys, we have gone through the running backs and the wide receivers here for week 11. Now, just a little tidbit here before we get going. I did want to talk about the quarterbacks. Now, it's going to be super quick here, but we have 3 quarterbacks that you could potentially pick up on the waiver wire if you are super desperate. I am not going to tell you to go out and get any of these guys in particular, but if you're desperate for a quarterback in 2 quarterback leagues and you need a backup on bye or something or whatever it may be, Jameis Winston, Alex Smith, and Daniel Jones. All of them under 30% owned. Obviously, Jameis is 2% because he's coming in for the 1-week filler. Alex Smith, 5% owned. No one's trusting that leg or that offense. And then Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones there. 30% owned. I put him on here because at the end of the day, he was the 3rd other option. But I'll be clear, guys, I'm not telling you to go out and pick any of these guys in your lineups this week. I will say the one that intrigues me the most in the matchups, if I had to rank these 3 in particular, I would go Alex Smith, Jameis Winston, and Daniel Jones maybe. Listen, Daniel Jones is so hit or miss. We know what he kind of is. Alex Smith has Cincinnati this week. It could be a really good matchup. And what we just saw, Big Ben put up 4 touchdowns against them in that matchup. And as we said, Cam Sims, Terry McLaurin, they can get involved. If you need a tight end, maybe Logan Thomas is another addition that you can go after for desperate flyer play. I'm not going to recommend Logan Thomas, by the way. But if you need a desperate tight end play, he could be someone that you might want to throw in a matchup. Even though Eric Ebron was shut down, it's a tough matchup for him. So I don't recommend that, but those are some guys available. But in my opinion, guys, the most dynamic one here is Jameis Winston, 2% owned. A bye week filler or an injury to Drew Brees, and you want to go with his backup. Listen, I get it that he's this turnover machine. He likes to eat the W's and all the goofy crap that he does. But we've seen him turn the ball over. We've also seen him put up points. That is the quarterbacks that I would recommend here in week 11. And I say recommend very, very loosely here. So keep that in mind. But if you guys have any particular roster decisions or contemplations that you need to make for the waiver wire or your rosters in general, drop a comment below and we will get back to you. Also, if you have any direct questions you want to ask me, you can hit me up at Rise and Fall Pod on Twitter. That's Rise N, the letter N, Fall, P-O-D on Twitter. Definitely hit us up, guys. Follow us on there. We'll have updates on injuries and so forth throughout the week. That is also where we post our Sunday rankings that will rank every player from every position. So we do incorporate rankings on this show, a holistic approach to week 11 here, and we'll be providing that at the end of the week, Sunday morning. My name is Dave Sarner, guys. This was an episode of the Rise and Fall Fantasy Football Show, Waiver Wire Edition, Week 11. Have a great weekend, enjoy the games, and I'll talk to you next.
Sitting throwing rocks across the pavement, hoping it will